Begin the current Daf, Mesech Rosh Hashanah Daf Yud Gimel. Begin on the bottom line of Yud Beis Beis, where the Gemara continues explaining the source of this halacha that was mentioned regarding one of the Rosh Hashanahs. We mentioned the Mishnah was Rosh Hashanah for Yerakis. We said that depends on the laws of Maestros when it was, and we brought a Mishnah Mesech Maestros that has different criterion regarding depending what the thing is, like Tilson is Mishnah Titzmach. And we said regarding Tavua, we said regarding Dog and Tirish V'Yitzu, we said that the halacha of when it's considered a pre to decide which year is in, it's Mishaviyu Shlish, when it brings a third. This the Gemara continues to explain that halacha, where what's the source, which we had brought a pasuk, how is that a definite interpretation to show that we go basa shlish, the third of the maturity of the grain, that to qualify what year is it was grown in regarding what year of Meiser is going to be taken up. Something we're going to discuss in today's daf are, like we said, the Rosh Hashanah of a Meiser, calculating the years of crops based on when they reach a third of their growth. How Bnei Yisrael brought the first carbon oima after entering Eretz Yisrael, and regarding defining the date. So the key terms and concepts we're discussing today's daf are Hashrasha, that certain items, the fruit, the way we qualify it is based on when it takes root, and if it takes root in that year, then it's that year of Meiser. Bila is the halachic concept that we consider things that they're mixed together, and if you hold that Yesh Bila, we say that we consider it as if it's mixed together evenly, and that whatever you're going to take from it is going to be equal distribution of the taregus of that mixture. Our Bam Sa is the halacha that a mikveh has to be exactly 40 sa, it can't be even one droplet off. Carbon omer is the carbon that they bring on the second day of Pesach from a barley offering from the new grain, and anything that had taken root at that point was going to be permitted that you could go ahead and have it that year. If it took root afterwards, you have to wait for the carbon omer of the following year. So we begin the current daf. The rest of the slides are missing, but we begin the current daf Yud Beis on the bottom line, where we had said that this halacha, a few lines up, we had asked non-milim, where do we know this from? That the Tvu and the Zaysim are considered its year, which the cutoff is Rosh Hashanah, that when it brings it third, it's qualified that was from that year. So we brought a pasuk that said at the end of 7 years, and the Moyer Shnasa Shemitah B'Chag Sukkos, which we want to know if it's after, it's in the 8th year, in Chag Sukkos, why are you calling it Shnasa Shemitah? So we said that because and this is what the Gemara is going to discuss now, because you're harvesting it on Sukkot, must have been that it grew already a third in the previous year of Shemitah, and therefore calling it Shnasa Shemitah. It's going to have that prohibition of the Shemitah produce. And that is where we continue. Only Rav Zera Ravasi. Zera says to Ravasi, who Ravasi had said this interpretation, as we continue to have a Gimel and Aleph, it says, V'dimela ayel klal, but maybe it didn't start ripening at all in the Shemitah year, and still, I mean, you're coming with the Shtickle Torah to tell me that if something is being harvested in 1 year, in the beginning of the year, it must have been that it already grew a third in the previous year. How do you know? Maybe it didn't start ripening at all in the Shemitah year, but still, B'Kam Rachman Torah is telling you Tisha Mitzvah Tezel, that the mitzvah of Shemitah should continue in its prohibition at Chag HaSukkos. And where do we know this? We had this on a previous daf from you're not allowed to plow, you're not allowed to harvest because of the Tosefes of the Yom Tiv of Shemitah. Maybe that's telling you that you should continue it till Sukkot time. How are you proving from this that you're calling Sukkot Mishnasa Shemitah because it extends on the this slide is missing. It extends into Sukkot, so that's how you knew that it grew a third. But how do you know that it grew anything? Maybe it's just telling you that Shemitah continues into Sukkot. So you cannot entertain to say that the pasuk is telling you just that the Shemitah is going to be forbidden. Rather, it's because it grew a third in the Shemitah year already. If you're harvesting in Sukkot, it must have grown a third. And we said that shows you that it's going to have the halachas of Shemitah because we go based on when it grows a third. Why? Because there's another pasuk. I've said the pasuk in Shemais, B'Chag HaAsaf, that the holiday of the gathering, it says Hashanah, at the end of the year. Now, my Asif, what does this pasuk mean when it calls it Chag HaAsaf? Elim, if you think to say that it's a name of, it's one of the titles of the name of Sukkot, And because it's a chag haba b'zman asifa, it's a yom tov that comes at the time of gathering of your grain from the fields. Why do you need to tell me that? In one pasuk, 2 times, haksiv, the pasuk already said itself in that same pasuk, ba'aspacha. It says already there, ba'aspacha, migarncha, ba'aspacha's masecha men asad. That tells you when you're going to gather. So elamai asif. So why are you saying again chag asif? You're already saying it's when you're gathering. So rather says the Gemara katzer. Actually, although Taisa says, of course, the simple translation of it is gathering, but we're going to translate it, and the Gemara later on is going to ask on this interpretation, but we're translating gathering as harvesting. And therefore, what the pasuk is telling you, that the Yom Tiv Ashehu Ba'asbachas Masech Men Asada, meaning that you're going to gather, the end of the pasuk says, your harvest from the field, this asif that you are harvesting in it is not from the incoming year. It's from the outgoing year. That's what the pasuk is trying to tell you, that b'tzeis, that this chag ha'kotze b'kur masecha shatiz b'asoda b'chag ha'asif b'tzeis hashana. What do you mean b'tzeis hashana? Is because yes, it's from the outcoming from the previous year, teaching you that what you're harvesting, even though it says the word asif, it's like it's a gathering that you're doing through harvesting. You're going to go after the year that passed. And moreover, the kimul rabbanon, the rabbis knew this, that they said that the grain, its meiser, goes after the year that it grew a third in. The chaltavua should niktzur b'chag. Again, based on how they're translating the pasuk now, that this chag ha'asif doesn't mean gathering, it's harvesting. And we're saying it's on Sukkot, that whatever you harvest in Sukkot, but you do, you know, Shavi Shlish L'Pnei Rosh Hashanah, that it already had grown a third of its maturation, because you're already harvesting. It already grew a third before Shoshana. We could correlate with say Shoshana, and you're calling it from the outgoing year, meaning from the year that passed. Obviously you see that by grain, which year do you qualify its part of, whether the law is a Shemitah, like we're talking about here in this pasuk, whether the law is a Maisa that we're talking about in our parak, that the primary concepts we're talking about from our previous Mishnah, that you're going to go based on when it grows a third, because here you have on Sukkot, and you're calling it B'tzeis Hashana, and why does it say Ba'asifa 2 times? Must be one Asifa means harvesting. You're harvesting on a Sukkot, and you're calling it that it's Shnas Shemitah, you're calling it that from the previous year, B'tzeis Hashana. Obviously, because the rabbis knew that if you're harvesting on Sukkot, it must have grown at least a third in the before Rosh Hashanah. It grew from Rosh Hashanah until Sukkot, and you're harvesting on Sukkot, but it had already grown at least a third before Rosh Hashanah, and therefore you see that if you're calling it Shnas Shemitah, we go based on when it grows a third. That's the source for this halacha. Now, Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah Zera says, do the rabbis really know? Do you think they're so proficient in knowing how, regarding agriculture, how grain grows, bein shlish l'pachas b'shlish, between a third or less than a third, to know that the grain is not fit to be harvested on Sukkot unless it grew a third in the previous year? To tell me that if you're telling me that you're harvesting in Sukkot, it must have been that why we're calling it B'tzeis Hashanah because it grew a third before Rosh Hashanah. Do they really know this? Like, I get mamish, like exactly the cutoff is Rosh Hashanah, that it must have grown a third before? So Amalei, so that Rabbi Zera says back to Rabbi Yirmiyah, he says, Lava minlach, didn't I tell you? Like, tepik nafshach l'bar mehelchasa. Don't remove yourself out of the criterion of halacha to start contending with the measurements of the chacham. Because all the measurements of the sage are like this, that they're so exacting. For example, a classic mashal is barbam sahu taivo. For a mikvah, to immerse oneself, they have to immerse in 40 sa of water. Barbam sahu sokartev, if there's 40 sa minus a kortev, which is a very small measurement, it's 1/8 of an eighth of a log. So it's 1/64 of a log, which is there's 40 sa here in this mikvah, and you can't tell what's such a mikvah because it's missing that a little bit. So to kebeya metame tamazaychan, if you have a food item that's the size of an egg, it will contaminate other things tuma of a food item. Which the reason for that is because Rabbanan knew that the person's throat cannot contain something more or less than, meaning what's exactly the size is the size of an egg of a chicken. Now it says by tumas eichlin, what's considered tumas eichlin? From any food that he will eat, which teaches a food that can be eaten in one shot. That's the measurement for tumas eichlin. That's the size of an egg. So that's metama tumas eichlin. Let's say you have something the size of an egg, minus a size of a sesame seed. It's almost like nothing. It's not going to contaminate to Mazaycha. Another example. Shleisha. You have a cloth that's 3 by 3 tefachim. It's betamim medras. Betamim medras is when there's a zav when they sit on something, so it's going to contaminate it a tumah of treading. Now the Chacham evaluated that 3 by 3 tefachim is a minimum thing that's fit for sitting. Less than that wouldn't be considered as an object that to have medras. Now shleisha chasen nima achas. If you have 3 by 3 tefachim minus 1 thread, it's not going to have tamas medras. So don't ask me and say, oh, what? Come on, when you Rosh Hashanah, it was a third, and they could tell the third or less of that. Yes, that's how shiur chacham are like. That's exactly precise, and therefore they say that it goes based on when it goes a third. Now, that was what Rabbi Yirmiyah had asked and what Rabbi Zera had answered. But Hada Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, subsequently Rabbi Yirmiyah said, "Lav milsi dami." I forget about it. The whole question that I asked, that I wanted to know, do the rabbis really know the difference between the third and less than the third? He says, forget about it. It wasn't even a good question in the beginning, because most definitely they do know. Why? Because the colleagues had asked from Rav Kahana the following question: the barley offering that the Jewish people sacrificed when they had just came into Eretz Yisrael for the first time. Where did they have barley from new grain to go ahead and bring as the carbon item? As the Gemara explains. In time, if you're going to say the ayil biyad nachi, that okay, we're talking about when they came into Eretz Yisrael, the grain had already matured from the barley before the Jews came into Eretz Yisrael. Is that the Gentiles from the Canaanim? Problem is the pasuk says from Reishis Kitzirchem Amar Rachmana. Torah says that it has to be the first of your harvest. Now, as Rashi explains, the moment it's fit to be harvested, it's already considered the Katsira. So, v'lo katsir nachri, it can't be the harvest of the Gentiles, so that wouldn't even qualify for the omer that you need to bring, if it grew and matured by the Gentiles. Now, question is, the Gemara first asked back, meaning Rav Kahana responded to those who were asking the question. He says, wait a second, you make a premise here that the Jews actually brought a carbon. They mind that kribi. Who said that they brought a carbon omer that year? The Malay kribi, maybe they actually did not bring the carbon omer. What are you asking? Where did they bring it from? Who said they brought it? He says, no, like it's like that. You can't entertain that. Why? Because the pasuk doesn't say the Yeshua. It says, they ate from the produce of the land. Shei's discuss exactly what day exactly that is, but it's the day of the sacrificing of the Yomer, which is the day after the first day of Pesach. So we see Mimachras HaPesach, and the Rambam brings this actually as a source to answer for the Tzedukim and the Beisusim, how he knows it's 16th of Nisan, not the day after Mimachras HaShabbos. Mimachras HaPesach Achal, which is they ate the day after the first day of Pesach, but before they didn't eat. Why? Obviously, because they kriva omer b'ad achli. Why would you just specifically eat grain on today? Is because you brought the omer on the 6th of Nisan, Mimachras HaPesach, and therefore you could eat now. So we're back to the question. So they obviously did bring the carbon omer, and that's why they only started eating the new grain then. So from where did they have grain to sacrifice it? So Malan, he said to them, Kol shleihevi shlish biyad nachri. Any grain, any barley that didn't yet mature a third by the hands of the Gentiles when the Jews came into Eretz Yisrael, that grain was not Ketzir Nachri, that was Ketzir Chem. Now says the Gemara, what do you mean? But Dima Ayel, this maybe it grew a third, as Rashi explains, this is the conclusion of Rabbi Yirmiyah's own statement. Rabbi Yirmiyah was saying, he says, I made a mistake when I even asked the question. And he's proving it from this, which is that if you would entertain to say that the Chum are not so proficient in agriculture, so maybe it grew a third by the Gentiles, and they didn't like Kimlu, but they didn't really assess it very well. How could they have known if it grew a third or not to know which barley to take to have brought that year when they came into Israel? Ella rather Kimlu. Obviously, the sages, they know how did they be able to discern what grew a third, what doesn't. So if that's the case, he says, you're also regarding the grain that was harvested on Sukkot, which is the pasuk that we start off the daf with. Kimlu, obviously they know that when we're saying it's Chaga Asam B'Tzeis Hashanah, that you're harvesting it, we're saying Asam means Ktsira, you're harvesting it on Sukkot, and we're calling it B'Tzeis Hashanah, and that they know that if we're considering from the previous year, it grew a third before Rosh Hashanah, that they know, they do know, as we see obviously from that other discussion, that that Rav Kahana had with his colleagues regarding the Omer when the Jewish people came into Eretz Yisrael, that they know. But, says the Gemara, a question on the proof. But how do you know that when they came to Eretz Yisrael, they were able to discern between if it grew a third or not? And therefore you're telling me, Rav, that you're agreeing, Rabbi Yirmiyah, that, oh, you made a mistake, because obviously they know, because they knew then, so obviously they know how to interpret this pasuk too. Maybe no. Maybe they checked, the Jewish people when they came to Yisrael, until they found grain that didn't mature at all. It just didn't sprout yet. And that's what they brought the Omer from. And that's very easy to discern. But let's say if it already matured a quarter of its growth, then maybe maybe it's not true. Maybe they don't know how to discern. Maybe they're not so understanding in agriculture to be able to discern between less than a third and more than a third. If it grew a quarter, it just didn't grow at all. So that was pretty obvious. That's evident to everyone. Says no, you cannot entertain to say that. You know why? Because the Pasuk says in Yeshua, Ba'am Olam in the Yarden, the Jewish people came up from the Jordan, but Asla Chaydish on the 10th of the month of Nisan. Now, these are that you entertain to say El Klal, like you want to reject the Raya, and say that nothing had grown yet from before Rosh Hashanah. So, and they only came on the 10th of Nisan. So they're looking over here, and 6 days from now, they're going to be bringing the Karban Omer. Are you telling me in 5 days it went from nothing to a full thing ready to harvest and to make a Karban Omer from? So obviously you can't say it didn't. Obviously it grew something, and yes, the Chacham have the ability to discern between a third and less than a third. But the Gemara rejects that and says, no, it's not true. It's still not a right. Elamai, so what do you tell me? The Ayel Riva a donkey. You tell me that, okay, it grew a quarter or grew a 6. So you tell me that in the 5 days it's going to go and grow exponentially and become something ready to harvest? So what are you going to tell me? Yes, I'll tell you according to Pasuk in Daniel. Because Eretz Svik Sivba, regarding Eretz Yisrael, it's called the land of the deer. Why? Just like a deer is very swift on its legs from all the wild animals, so to Eretz Yisrael, it's very quick to ripen its fruits from all the other lands. As the Gemara says, so it says, if that's the case, you tell me it went from a quarter to ready to harvest in 5 days. So Hachanam, I can tell you, Eretz Svik Sivba, I can tell you that maybe it didn't grow at all. And maybe in 5 days, it went, just plopped out and was ready to go. And therefore, again, there's no raya that that Chazal, that our sages know the difference between a third or less than a third, and therefore maybe we taka grew in 5 days, and there's no raya to this concept. But Al Kapanim, Rabbi Meir wanted to back out from this and say, yes, obviously they did know, and therefore my question doesn't stand. How do they know that it was grew a third before Rosh Hashanah, and we're calling it B'tzeis Hashanah, that it goes based on that year, which again is all from the previous Daf. We're trying to show how we know Dog and Tish V'Yitzur, that its year of Maisa goes on when they grew a third. But the Gemara, however, has a question. Chanina asks on this whole Ravasi that he proves that we go based on the year when they grew a third, and that we're continuing it from the previous year from the pasuk of a Chaga Asif. Now the question is, can you really say the Hay Asif Katzerhu? You wanted to tell me that there's an extra word Asif there in the pasuk. Because, like we said, in that same pasuk, it says in Shemais Chav Gimel Tazai, it says V'chaga Asif B'tzeis Hashanah B'aspachas Masachem L'Asada. You already told me that's B'aspacha. So why are you calling it Chaga Asif? It's unnecessary to say Asif because you're calling it B'aspacha. Must be Asif is talking about to tell you a terminology of Ketzira, to tell me that you're harvesting it on Sukkot, and you're calling it B'tzeis Hashanah, which obviously that means to say like Chazal knew that it grew a third before Rosh Hashanah, and you're calling it from the previous year, obviously because the year that it grows a third is the year that's going to qualify for what year it's considered that it grew. The problem is, but there's a pasuk, another pasuk in Devar, that says that Chag HaSukkot you should make for you 7 days, when you gather your grain and you gather your wine. Now, the Gemara tells us in Sukkot of Beis Amid Aleph, the pasuk is coming to teach you that you should make the schach of a sukkah b'psoilis gorin v'yakav b'kasm. The pasuk is telling you should take the refuse, the leftovers of the granary and of the wine vat. What's left over in the granary and the wine vat? So you have the husks, you have the branches. What type of criterion is it that the schach has to be made of? So first of all, it has to be something that's not makabel tuma, like these items. They're not food items. That the leftovers. And also, number 2 is that gidulim in the arts that they grow from the ground. Now, this Chaga Asif of the pasuk that we said on the top of the Amid, you wanted to tell me that it's superfluous because it already says there at the end of the pasuk, "Ba'as b'chaz masecha." So what are you calling it Chaga Asif? Okay, so it's extra again. We already said this. Asif means katsira. Not true, says the Gemara. It's not extra. What do you mean? Why are you calling it Chaga Asif? That's the name of the Yom Tiv for a different reason. Why do we call Chaga Sukkah Chaga Asif? Is because the sukkah has to be covered with Asif Mikarncha Mikvecha from the B'sailis, what you gather over there. So like Rashi explains, as if the pasuk said, "V'chaga sukkah b'tzeis hashana, ba'as b'chamasecha." At a time when the person gathers his grain from the field into his house, that's what the pasuk is telling you. But it's not like a redundant term that you said already, asif and asif. No, asif is not coming to tell me that us regarding gathering. It's just the name of the Yom Tiv. Why? Because sukkah is the hut. What do you cover the hut with, which is the schach? That's with what you will eisiv migarn chamikevecha. So it's not an extra word to tell me this must be katsira and then must be that it's harvesting a sukkah so you do a third before Rosh Hashanah because Chazal know how to differentiate and it's calling b'tzeis Hashanah must have been you're considering from the previous year grew a third. Nothing to do with that. It's just telling you the name of the Yom Tiv because that's what the sukkah is. That's the hut and that's the schach. So Rabbi Zeri says, "Ha milsa have b'yadan." This teaching was in our hands. In other words, we thought that we're going to learn now from this pasuk that grain is qualified what year it grew in based on when it grew a third. And Rabbi Chanina came along and Shada Beinarka, he threw an axe into it to tell us that no, Aisib, the word Asib makes sense in the words of the pasuk. It's not extra to learn out Ketzir from. And therefore says, so we're back to the original question, where do we know this halacha, which we started from the previous daf, which we brought in that Mishnah Masechtas Meisers to tell you that by grain and by wine and by zaysim we go after the year that grew the third. Where do we know that from? So the Gemara says a different source can tell you, learn the Brisa. B'yonsim ben Yosef Leimei says, the pasuk says in a Yikra. Pasuk says regarding the laws of Shemitah, the year that we're in right now, Hashem says, I'm going to command my blessing for you in the 6th year. And don't worry, you're going to wonder what are we going to eat? Don't worry. In the 6th year, you're going to have so much for 3 years. So the 7th and the 8th and the 9th, so that it's going to cover you because of the Shemitah year. But as we continue to Beis, the Gemara tells us a drasha. I'll take you the shlish. Don't read it for 3 years. Elu l'shlish. Rather, that the grain is considered v'asas. When is the tvu considered as it was made? Is l'shlish hashana. Is when it matured a third. Is when, again, it's a drasha. Is that that's considered that it was made, and that's the source that we see that grain is qualified when it grows a third. But as we continue to the base, but the Gemara says, what are you talking about? How could you use this pasuk as a drush? Don't you need it as a response for Manoich Mashana Hashviyas? Isn't that the simple understanding of the pasuk? That what are we getting in the 7th year? It says, don't worry, I'm going to make for you for 3 years that l'shlish. But you tell me that it means l'shlish? So, but then what is the response? What are we going to do? What are we going to eat? Says the Gemara, no, that's Siv Karachin. For that we have another pasuk. Pasuk Meyikru is Ratim as Hashana Shmidas. That you're going to plant in the 8th year, right? You can't plant in the 7th year. That's Shemitah. You can plant in the 8th year. And you can eat from the old grain. What old grain? Old grain. Last year was Shemitah. From the 6th year. Until the 9th year. So you see from another pasuk this bracha and a response to Manoichel. And therefore this pasuk could be extra to tell you not l'shlish, but rather l'shlish. But ultimately this was the source that the Gemara brought from the previous daf. How do we know Tavua regarding the laws of Maisa, which is one of the Rosh Hashanah that we said in the Mishnah, which were on the last leg of the previous Mishnah that we said Rosh Hashanah Yirakas is from Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, which is we said regarding the laws of Maisa, and we said that regarding Tavua and Zaysim, its year goes based on when it grows a third. Now, continue on that theme. Nan Hasan regarding qualifying the year of Meiser regarding different types of vegetation. So learn the Mishnah Masechtas Shvius that says ha'oiris regarding rice, v'adoichin, millet, quinoa, whatever, v'aprogin, and poppy seeds, v'ashumshin, and sesame seeds, which these are all types of kitnias, of legumes, which is meaning you eat the seed itself, and they're types of zrayim. So shehishrishu lifnei Rosh Hashanah. If it took root before Rosh Hashanah, so you see that here the qualification is taking root. Mis'asim l'sha'ava. Then the tithing is going to be based on the previous year. If it was the 2nd year, it's Meiser Sheni. If it was the 3rd year, Meiser Ani. And we turn B'Shvius. Let's say it took root before the Shemitah year before Rosh Hashanah, so it's considered from the pre-Shemitah year. It's going to be permitted Shemitah. It's not considered Shemitah produce. Now, if in love, let's say it didn't take root before Rosh Hashanah. Oh, then Asur Mishvius, and it's considered the Shemitah produce, and it's forbidden. And the tithing is going to be of the next year, meaning when you're harvesting it, if it's from one of the other Shemitah years, meaning not the Shemitah year itself, then if it's not a Shemitah year, then it's going to be based on that year, because it took root only after that of Rosh Hashanah. However, the Gemara has a question. Amar Rabba. It says, Amar Rabbanan, the rabbis had told us, and we discussed some of these things in the previous Daf. The rabbis told us that Elon, by a tree, basachanato. You go based on when it's blossoming. The Gemara tells us later on the Tezvav Mabeis, and we learned that a tree that if when the blossom falls off, when it's starting to emerge, the produce, if it comes out before Tu B'Shvat, which that's the Rosh Hashanah of trees, we said the Maisa goes based on the previous year. I mean, you go based on when the fruit is starting to blossom. Tvuv is asim, you tell me by, and this is what we just finished discussing, you told me regarding grain, which includes wine, and regarding olives, you told me basa shlish. And that's we just brought the source right now, it goes based on when it grows a third. Yerek, that you told me, you go basa lekita. By vegetables, you go based on when it's picked. And that we said on Daf Yomi, we said if let's say you gather a vegetable Erev Rosh Hashanah, and then Rishon by night, a different one, we said that those are going to be different years. So you have all these different qualifications. Trees goes based on chanata. Tvu and Zaysim goes a shlish. Yerek is likita. So hani, this that you tell me regarding kidney ice, regarding the sesame and the poppy seeds and the rice and the millet. Kaman shavin rabbanon. Like whom did the rabbis make them that you're going based on when it takes root? It's a whole different qualification from all these other things. What is the model that you're saying that it goes based on taking root? So Hadam Rabba then himself responded, I'll tell you, because since when it comes to legumes, specifically there, as we find in Beis, that regarding these little seeds, what they would do is they roll it in their hand and crush the legumes on Yom Tov. So that's how you eat it oftentimes. You take these seeds and you crumble them. Now, what that means to say that you crumble them is that they're geirin. Geirin is generally when something's ready and fit for meiser, which you make it into a pile. When regarding these kidneys, regarding rice and millet, they do a little bit at a time because they're not really gathered at one time. Rather, today you gather and you crumble them a little bit, and tomorrow a little bit. Now, it comes out that you would have the new and the old mixed together, meaning you would have those that you crumble from before Rosh Hashanah with those that you crumble after Rosh Hashanah. If you went after Likita, which is the time when you gathered it, like other vegetables. So when you're separating your meisters, you can be separating from the new and the old and the new. Because you don't gather it all at one time. You gather a little bit here, and you crumble it, you gather a little crumble it, and then the problem is that you're going to have them all mixed together at the end of the day. So therefore, Asli Rabbana Basa Shasha. So that's why the rabbis went after when it takes root. Meaning, as Rashi explains, the rooting of them happens in 1 year because you planted at one time. It's just that when you actually gathered, they would gather it a little bit at a time and crumble it, the poppy seeds and the millet seeds, all these different things. Now, as Rashi gives the background, the meiser of fruits of a tree and of kidneys and of vegetables, they're all rabbinic. And therefore what? So the Chachamim were able to give a set time according to their understanding for each and every one individual. Meaning, for dog and tertiary, that's biblical, that goes based on when it grows a third, and now we have to bring a rye from a pasuk. But regarding trees, when it blossoms, and regarding vegetables, when you gather it, and regarding kidneys, when it takes root, they could just give it based on what makes sense to them, because it's rabbinic. Now, why are you going based on when it takes root? So we're telling you, because if you went based on Lakita, you would have a problem. Why? Because Lakita doesn't happen at one time regarding these kidneys. Because you take a little bit and you crumble, you take a little bit and you crumble it, and then you're going to have, your whole big pile is mixed from what you gathered. And Lakita, you tell me, if you went like other Irakas, you go based on Lakita, but I did some before some after Hashanah. And now you have one big Taraivas would be a problem, because you can't take from Yichadash and Yashin and Yashin L'Chadash, and there's a cutoff time. So Chazal said, you know what we're going to do with kidneys? We're going to go ahead and make it based on Hashrash, when it takes root. Take a root, it takes root at the same time. So therefore, it's not going to be a problem when you gathered it, because that's not the qualification. The qualification is when it takes root. However, interesting question, only Abaye. Abaye has the following question. He says, what's the problem? Who cares if you have the old and the new mixed together, which generally that is a big problem because you can't take meiser of 1 year and another year. He says, no, I'll tell you what. In other words, let him pile his whole pile in the middle of his field so that everything is mixed together, all together. And it comes out when he's going to take trumas and meisers that it's going to be he's going to take from the new grain, from the new legumes, from the new kidneys, on the old ones, meaning according to whatever new there is here in the pile, and from the old according to however old is inside of it. What's he saying? So he says, I'll explain to you what I mean to say. Mila Tanya, didn't we learn in the Brisa that we rely on what's called bila? What's bila? Bila is this what?
You have to say brera.
Why brera?
Because you don't know what you're picking. You might be picking only from the ocean and nothing.
You can't really say brera because it really is. Brera, it means I'm going to retroactively verify. Here's not verification. It really is old and new. And
what if you took only old?
And if I take a certain amount, there is only a certain amount of new and a certain amount of old. Bila is the concept that I say it's all mixed together well enough that whatever I'm going to be taking for the quantity that I know of new there is, it's just that they're mixed together, it's going to be that what I'm taking is from the new. There is actual new. I can't verify it. This is either from the new or from the old. Bila is the concept that's so well mixed together that when I'm going to take out a certain amount, proportionately, it's going to be the amount of the new and the amount of the old, according to the proportion that there is inside of it. So let's say there's 10 of the new and 10 of the old. And I'm taking now, let's say, meiser. So I have to take 2. So I'm taking a bowl of 2. How do you know? Maybe you have 1.5 of one and you have 0.5 of the other one. No. Bila tells me it's so well mixed together that it's proportionate to the amount of the mixture. That's the halachic concept of Bila. It says, so if you have that concept, so what's the problem? I'm not taking from the new and the old and the old and the new. I'm taking from the new and the new and the old and the old. Just mix it all together. Because didn't we learn the Brisa that Rabbi Yisrael ben Kippur Omer, Bishlam Shimon Shizuri, that he says, Pul HaMitzri, the Egyptian bean. It's a type of kidneys, type of legume, which interesting, sometimes they would plant it. Oftentimes you have vegetation that has a plant, and the plant has a seed. And they would, think about a wheat stalk. I'm saying there's vegetation, there's a plant, and then there's the seed inside. Now the kidney is the seed itself. We eat the seed itself. Oftentimes not eating the seed, eating the plant. Certain things they would plant for the yerek, for the vegetation, and for the seed. Now, what's interesting about this Egyptian bean is that if you're planting it for the yerek, you want the herb, you want the leaves, let's say. So then the mice would go based on Lakita, like your ruckus, which go based on when you actually gather it together. Now, if you plant it to eat the seed, then it has a halachic status as kidneys, which that's what the seed is. You're eating the bean itself, you're eating, that's what kidneys are. Then the mice goes based on when it takes fruit. Like we said, is halacha kidneys. So let's say that you have this Egyptian bean. Shazara lazera. You planted it for the seed, meaning you don't want to eat the leaf. You want to eat the seed, which therefore it's kidneys, which goes based on when it takes root. So miktsasa hishrish lefnei Rosh Hashanah. So some of it took root before Rosh Hashanah. Miktsasa hishrish la'achar Rosh Hashanah. And some of it took root after Rosh Hashanah, meaning some of this whole plantation. So it says, Rabbi Shimon Shizuri, that in time ma'aser mizeh. You can't take trumas and meises from this one, which, like Rashi explains, that you recognize that it was planted later. Alzeh, on this one that was planted first, and not from the one that was planted first on the later one. Why not? Again, because some took root before Rosh Hashanah, and Rosh Hashanah is the cutoff time, and we go here on legumes, kidneys based on Hashrasha. And Levish ain't term in the meises, you cannot take trumas and meises. Lemon chadash yash, not from new and old, but lemon yash chadash, not from new and old, not new and old, and not from old and new. Now, the question then becomes, so what does he do? As Rashi explains, it's very cumbersome to go ahead and take meiser specifically from this one individually and this one individually. It's a very difficult thing to do that. So, and this is where Abaye's question is coming from. So Reb Shimon Shizuri says, I'll tell you what to do, very easy. Pile up the greenery inside, meaning mix it all together very well. After you had already placed from the first harvest, meaning the ones that were rooted before Shana in one corner, and the second one in another corner. So even though you have them separate, but it's still a very cumbersome process, very difficult. So go ahead, now that you have them separate, then go ahead and pile them into the middle of the granary. There shall all be one. The nimtza tayir ma'asa, now it's going to come when you're taking Trubas and Maisis, is min ha'chadash shabai ala chadash shabai. It's from the new that's inside of here on the new that it's being ma'aser for. Umin ha'yashin shabai ala yashin shabai, and the old is on the old. Because you mix it very well together, and then, great, whatever you're going to take is going to be from the new and the new, and old and old. That's what Shmuel says you should do. So Abai is saying, why are you telling me that Chazal went by kidneys based on Hashrasha? Why? Why can't it be like other Irakas? Because if you went based on Lakita, you would have a problem because some of them you're being like it before Rosh Hashanah and some after, and then you're going to have a mixture which is going to cause a problem. So therefore they have to go based on Hashrasha, so that, okay, great, take root, they all took root at the same time. Some you're being like it now, some you're being like it later, it doesn't make a difference. We're not doing that, we're going based on rooting. Says about why do you have to do that? Let it be like a regular Yerakis, that you don't have to make a new meister of Hashrasha, is when you malakid it. You tell me something you can malakid before and some after? No problem. Make a big pile, and then take off Trumas and Meisters. Whatever's from the new, you will be taking from the new. Whatever's from the old, you'll be taking from the old because of the halacha concept that we see here. Shimon Shazuri holds of Yesh Bila.
Is Abai asking only on kidneys or on anything that he's passing?
Right, you're saying you could really be everything. Right. In other words, he's just saying why you have to make up a new, meaning usually things would go based on what qualifies that as a vegetation. So fruits is when the fruit's starting to develop, but here you're making up a new thing of Hashrasha. Why do you have to make it up for? Why can't you just do your Because like we say, like Shimon Shazuri says, I don't know if it's like a tchila, but Al Kapanim, you're saying to make up a new zman of Hashrasha, what do you have to make it up for? Just mix it all together, and then it'll be from the new on the new and old on the old. That's his question. What do you need that for? So Amalei, so Rabbi said to him, Shimon Shazuri, come you tell me Shimon Shazuri Saba Yesh Bila. He holds that you can rely on Bila, in other words, to say that you have from both of them in the Maisa that you're taking proportionately according to that calculation, because things are so well mixed that we're going to say that what you're taking has that proportion. Rabbanan Savi ain't Bila. But Rabbanan say that you cannot rely on that to say that it wasn't mixed that well. And therefore, it might be that the majority of your Maisa might be from the new, or the majority might be from the old. And then you're taking from Chadash and Yashin and Chadash. And therefore, the Rabbanan didn't hold to that. According to the Rabbanan, they said you have to go based on Hashrasha by kidneys, because if you went based on Lakita and you would have from the old and the new, and it would be mixed together, and you would take up Trumas and Maisis, you would have from different years, which is not valid. Now, halachically, the Gemara Big Zamar Yitzchak ben Nachman Amr Shmuel. He says, halacha Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur, Amr Shimon Shazuri. What was that halacha that Shimon Shazuri had said? He said that if you have from the Egyptian bean that you planted for the seed, which is like kidneys, if some took root before Shana and some after, he said no problem, put it into one big pile, and then take off. It'll be from the new and the new and the old, which sounds like that Shmuel holds Yesh Bila. Shmuel's ruling, like a Shimon Shazuri, that you could do that. But Maskal Reb Zeh says Reb Zeh has a difficulty. Did Shmuel really say this? But Shmuel says another halacha. He says, Lakol ein bila. He says, for all vegetation, we don't say that it's mixed together. Chutz miyayin b'shem, except for wine and oil, where if someone mixes the new wine with the old wine, or the new oil with the old oil, you could take out Trumas and Maisis from it, and then you'll have an Amaisa of both of them according to the calculation. The reason for that is because a liquid mixes very well. But a solid, you can't rely on bila. So how could Shmuel have ruled like Rav Shimon Shazuri that when you have your Egyptian beans that some took root before Shana, some took root after, that no problem, just mix it together and take, but Shmuel doesn't hold it bila. So how could he rule like Rav Shimon Shazuri? Says the Gemara Ishtamit say that Reb Zehu asked the question, it alluded to him a third halach of Shmuel. Hadam Shmuel said, Hakol hoylech achar gemar pri. Everything goes after when the fruit is finished its maturity. Meaning, as Rashi explains, by kidneys, we don't go after when it takes root. When Shmuel said the halach is like a Shimon Shazuri, meaning, which even that it had taken root, meaning even if a person went and picked some before or after the Zman together, so some took root before and some took root after, this that he says like Shimon Shazuri, no problem, put it in one big pile, it's not because of that he holds like Shimon Shazuri's understanding and rationale, which is because of Bila. Rabbi Shimon Shazuri is because of Bila. The reason of Shmuel is because it's all considered new grain. Why? Because although some took root before and some took root after, we don't go based on the Hashrasha. We go based on when the Gemara the Pri is. The Gemara the Pri of both of them were after Rosh Hashanah. So that's why he says no problem. Some took root before, some took root after. It's not a problem because we go based on the Gemara. The Gemaras both are going to be after Rosh Hashanah. That's why he said you can pile it together. As you continue top of Yudal and Aleph, the Gemara says now it's Richa. We needed all these three teachings of Shmuel. We had three teachings. One was halachas like Shimon Shazuri, that you could pile it all together and take Trumas and Maises from them all in one. He also said another halacha that everything besides wine and oil, there's no bila. And the third teaching was, by everything we go after Gemara Pri, we go after when the Pri is finished. Why do we need all these three teachings? So the Gemara explains. The Yashmin halacha like Shimon Shazuri had, we said halacha like Shimon Shazuri, so how many we would have thought to say, as we actually asked the question, because, he holds like Shimon Shazuri, well, why does he hold that you can mix it all together? Because even though it's actually from different years, no problem, but Bila tells us like all mixed together and proportionally you're taking the right amount. Kamashmalan, that's we need the second teaching of Shmuel to say, no, l'chol ein Bila. He holds actually there's no Bila. It's only wine and oil that we would hold. V'yashmin l'chol ein Bila, and had he said the second halacha that for everything there's no Bila, I would have thought to say, okay, holds like Rabbanan, and that when you have your Egyptian bean, some that were rooted before Rosh Hashanah, some afterwards, you wouldn't be able to take chumas from it when it's mixed together, and there wouldn't be anything to do to fix the old and the new that got mixed together, only if you took up chumas from a different place according to the calculation how much you have new on new and old on old. But from here itself, you would be stuck because you don't know what's what. That's where I have to tell you that no, he holds actually like that you could take from it itself. Now, wait a second. Now, if we had these two teachings, how many I would have thought to say, Kash and Shmuel. I would say, but how do they both coexist? Here Shmuel is saying like Rabbi Shimon, which is yes, Bila. Here he's saying, Ain Bila. That's when we need the third teaching. Everything goes after when the peri is finished. To tell me that it's all considered new grain. And halacha like Rabbi Shimon ben Afim is reasoning, not because of yes Bila, because they're really from different years, but it's all no problem because Bila takes care of it. No, it's all from the same year. It doesn't go based on Hashasha, it goes based on Gemar Pri, and they're both finishing at the same time. Now, but then one more point. V'yeshmin had we said if he had only said the third halacha, how many I would have thought to say? Because that would have taken care of everything. I wouldn't have to tell you hold like Shimon's halacha, just Gemar Pri, I know when it is. No. I would have thought to say I felt tefillah b'zeitz and nothing. I would have thought to say that even grain and oil and wine, there also you wouldn't go based on when it goes to a third. I would have thought to say what year is it qualified based on when the Gemara the Pri. That's why he had to tell you halacha Shimon b'may de polig, meaning in types of kidneys. That's what Shmuel said that if you mix together those that took root before Rosh Hashanah and those that took root after Rosh Hashanah, that's where you go ahead and take maises on them together. Meaning, and he gave a reasoning for that, as his other halach had said, because you go after Gemar Peri. But that's only specifically like Egyptian beans by things that are legumes, like kidneys. But by grain and olives, then you wouldn't go based on the Gemar Peri. Then you go based on when it grows a third. And then the Gemara says, wait, one more question. So then only say those two halachas. For the fact that Shmuel says everything goes after the Gemar Peri. And he lets us know, obviously, that this they say halacha like Rabbi Shimon is not because of Bila, rather because it's all considered new grain. But Bila doesn't hold it. If he held of Bila, then why would he tell us Peri? You don't even have to go Achim Peri. Why do I have to know when it is? It doesn't make a difference when it is. Anytime that it is, I can just mix it together and have Bila. Why do you have to make Yesh Peri? So l'chol ein Bila lamali. Why does he need the middle halacha to tell me for everything there's no Bila? What do I need that for? I don't need to know that for any purposes anyway. Says the Gemara, you're right. You wouldn't need to know l'chol ein Bila because anyway you know that you're not going based on Bila. You told me that it's because of Gemar Peri. How come what it is teaching me is the end of that teaching. That's what we need it for. You're right. It doesn't hold a Bila, and we never thought that it was coming from Bila. When he said Allah Shimon Shazuri was only regarding that because of Gemar Peri. And the only reason why he said that teaching was to tell you that only there is where he's saying that you go Gemar Peri, is like in the case of Rishon, which is Kitnias. But by Tvu and Zaysim, that he wouldn't hold Gemar Peri. That's actually a shlish. The reason why he needed the middle halacha, L'chol Ein Beila, I already know he doesn't hold the Beila. I never thought he'd hold. But it's because he actually tell you that for Yayin Shemin, that there is Beila. That's why he said that middle halacha. That's why he did all three teaching. That's wrong. Thank you for any time.